Welcome to the 10-Minute Podcast. Normally we don't have time for introductions, but this is episode 1, so we'll make an exception. I'm Richard Sterling, you're watching Politics for Teens, and this is the 10-Minute Podcast where we break down the top news stories in 10 minutes or less. Let's get into our first story of the day. Dead are still being recovered in North Carolina after Hurricane Helene, which struck the last week of last month. An article's headline on Tuesday on The Guardian said, "We're still finding dead neighbors in North Carolina. We need help." The article reported Hurricane Helene was devastating, and so far the government emergency response hasn't been nearly what we had hoped. A headline run yesterday by Fox News, a little bit more conservative site, said Hurricane Helene, more than 90 reported dead in North Carolina. Authorities can't yet confirm how many missing. How does this affect the political landscape? Obviously, it seems the consensus is government agencies have dropped the ball a little bit on the approach, or maybe quite a bit, depending on who you ask. On this approach to the disaster, according to NBC News, Hurricane Helene upends Trump's and Harris's plan for one of the biggest swing states. Harris is racing against lost time to flip the red state of North Carolina. Trump is combating a Democratic operation that dwarfs his own. However, Slate ran an article titled "The Harris Campaign is Making a Huge Mistake in North Carolina and Georgia," referring to former President Bill Clinton's plan to campaign for the Harris campaign in those two states, respectively. Meanwhile, flooding and power outages afflict Florida after Milton, according to the New York Times. Further, at least 13 deaths were tied to the hurricane and its aftermath. Some of the storm's worst destruction came from tornadoes kicked up on the other side of the state from landfall. However, according to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, the storm was significant, but thankfully, this was not the worst-case scenario. He goes on to say the storm did weaken before landfall, and the storm surge, as initially reported, has not been as significant overall as what was observed in Hurricane Helene. Speaking of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, he got in a little bit of a spat with Vice President Harris over this last week. Let's see what Vice President Kamala Harris had to say about Ron DeSantis and the way he's handling the hurricanes.
Playing political games at this moment in these crisis situations, these are the height of emergency situations. It's just utterly irresponsible, and it is selfish, and it is about political gamesmanship instead of doing the job that you took an oath to do, which is to put the people first.
That's Vice President Kamala Harris, obviously saying that Ron DeSantis is turning these hurricanes into a political event rather than making sure that lives are put at the forefront of everyone's thoughts and minds. Let's see what Ron DeSantis, one of his responses, of his many responses that he has made to this claim, let's check out what he had to say.
She has never called on any of the storms we've had since she's been vice president until apparently now. Why all of a sudden is she trying to parachute in and inject herself when she's never shown any interest in the past? We know it's because of politics. We know it's because of her campaign.
Also weighing into this conversation, President Biden came out in what it seems like support of Ron DeSantis, praising his approach to handling the hurricanes, as well as all of the governors in these states' approach, but especially praising Ron DeSantis in what many conservatives were claiming was an attack against his vice president, Kamala Harris. However, NBC News is reporting that according to a person familiar with the situation, Biden was unaware that Ron DeSantis has refused to take Harris's call when he praised him as, quote, gracious. Keeping up with Kamala Harris, she did an interview with The View this week. She was asked a series of questions. One especially is going viral, but I want to add a little bit of context to this. The first question, what do you think would be the biggest difference between your presidency and a Biden presidency? And Kamala broke down a number of different passions that she has that Biden does not, and that he might have that she does not, that could lead to differences in their respective political presidencies. But then she was asked more specifically, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the last 4 years? And her response was, this is the part that's really been shared a lot. She answered, there's not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had an impact. There's Kamala Harris saying she wouldn't change anything over the last 4 years that President Biden has done, and in fact, she's had quite a big role in getting things done that the Biden administration has done. Speaking of the Harris campaign, Tim Walz, made some electoral college comments that people are talking about quite a bit. According to an article by the Daily Wire, Walz said, "I think all of us know the Electoral College needs to go. We need a national popular vote." According to the article, Walz said earlier to some of his supporters that I'm a national popular vote guy, but that's not the world we live in. However, according to an article by MSNBC, quote, Walz was just sharing a passing thought, not announcing a new position on the part of the Democratic ticket. In an ABC News interview aired this morning, Walz cleared the air, said that his real thoughts on this are in line with the campaign, and that the campaign isn't making this into a running issue, and they don't have plans to try and get rid of the Electoral College anytime soon. Those were his thoughts on that. University of Kansas professor just got caught saying there are going to be some males in our society that will refuse to vote for a potential female president because they don't think females are smart enough to be president. We could line all those guys up and shoot them, and they clearly don't understand the way the world works. Did I say that? Scratch that from the recording. I don't want the deans hearing that I said that. So that's obviously a bit crazy. We here at Politics for Teens feel like it's necessary to say we do not condone any political violence. No one should be shot for the way that they vote in the 2024 election, no matter which way they vote. And that should be the consensus among Americans. All right, speaking of getting shot and death, according to NBC News, an Afghan national living in the U.S. was charged with plotting an Election Day terrorist attack. Newsweek is reporting that the Afghan migrant charged with Election Day plot is said to have worked for the CIA. Let's get an Israel update. This week did mark the 1 year from the dreadful October the 7th terrorist attack against Israel. According to ABC News, Hezbollah steps up rocket fire as Israel sends more troops into Lebanon. The BBC reports a couple was killed by Hezbollah rocket fire in northern Israel. Election update. Do we have time? We do have time. We're going to get into an election update here. Talk this week is on the blue wall. The 18 U.S. states and the District of Columbia that historically have voted Democratic in presidential elections from 1992 to 2012, those 20-year period, these 18 states only voted blue in presidential elections. 2016, the blue wall broke, and then in 2020, it was restored. Specifically, people are talking about Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. The Washington Free Beacon writes, blowing the blue wall, Democratic strategics, donors fear Harris is slipping in crucial swing states. Axios reports top Democratic politicians and operatives tell us the vital states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are getting tougher for Vice President Harris and the party's Senate candidates. Polling by Quinnipiac University has Harris leading in Pennsylvania 49-46. Trump leads in Michigan 50-47, and in Wisconsin 48-46. However, CNN's latest Road to 270 map has Harris in the lead of the election, with Trump trailing by 7 electoral votes. Trump returns to Butler, Pennsylvania on Saturday, the site of the July assassination attempt. According to the conservative news site The Daily Wire, Trump begins Butler rally with chart that saved his life. Liberal-leaning outlet The New York Times writes the former president returned to the stage where a gunman tried to kill him in July and tried to recapture some of the momentum he had before President Biden dropped out. Left-wing NBC News reports Trump mixes somber remembrance with heated rhetoric in his return to Butler, Pennsylvania. Finally, an article by Blazing Media reports Elon Musk made an animated appearance at Trump's return to Butler, Pennsylvania, where a crowd of approximately 24,000 showed up to support the Republican candidate in the very spot he was nearly assassinated 12 weeks ago. With arms quite literally lifted in the air, Musk, donning a MAGA hat, took the stage at Trump's invitation and delivered a message that left the masses roaring in approval. We don't have time to get to this story, but our final story of the day, Elon introduces an army of Optimus robots. I'd encourage everyone to check that out. It's crazy. Elon AI, these robots. And Elon is saying, reportedly, that these will be up for sale, for purchase in the near future. You can have your own robot for a pretty penny. If you want, you can go around mowing your lawn and cooking for you, perhaps. So check out the Optimus robots. That's all the time we have for today. Register to vote Make sure you get out and vote this election cycle. It's extremely important. Subscribe to Politics for Teens. Follow us on X, Instagram, and Facebook. Send us an email. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know if there's something in this episode that was blatantly partisan from your perspective. We'd love to hear from you about how we're doing with nonpartisanship here at Politics for Teens, or leave a comment down below. We'd love to see that as well. Thank you very much, and we will see you next time in the 10-Minute Podcast.